Yesterday, I was privileged to honor a number of local and national heroes, along with Governor Pat Quinn. Those heroes received awards. They were Bill Strickland and Jerry Mitchell, who you heard last night, Rob Warden, who you heard today, and those wonderful young people from the Interrupters. Daniel Hernandez could not be there. He was in San Francisco working with a Latino group, but he took a 5 o'clock plane this morning, and he just arrived here. And so we want to welcome Daniel Hernandez to TEDxMidwest. He was the young man at age 20. He was an intern, a volunteer working for her, when this incredible scene occurred where a young man, 23 years old, started shooting at the congressman, shot 16 people, 19 people, 6 of whom died. And fortunately, the congresswoman was saved by Daniel's immediate heroic act of racing out and stopping her bleeding. And remember, she was shot in the forehead, and a bullet lodged in her brain. And had he not been there, had he not had some training in triage and basic nursing, Congressman Gifford would have died. And so I'd like to welcome Daniel to receive his belated award, and then he'll talk to us about his experience.
Thank you.
You deserve it.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here tonight to receive this award, like he mentioned. Unfortunately, I was actually speaking to an education group in San Francisco last night, so I apologize for not being there last night. But what I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about what happened on January the 8th, but also a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned since then. I think one of the things after a really tragic incident that happens is you reflect on what has happened. And you reflect on things that you already knew, and you realize that a lot of the lessons that you think you learned on that day or that tragic event are things you've known for years. For me, it starts when I was actually 5 years old. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and my little sister, Alma, jumped, and I hit the back of my head, and I cracked my skull open. And I'm bleeding profusely. We get to the hospital, and for me, at the age of 5, the only time I'd ever heard of the word hospital was when someone was dying. So for me, having to go to the hospital because my head was open was the belief that I was dying, because every other time that I'd ever been to a hospital was because someone else was sick and dying. But when I got to the hospital, I had a very unique experience. I had a nurse who came up to me and gave me a big hug and said, "Everything's gonna be okay." She took me in to her embrace, looked at the back of my head and said, "You know, this isn't as bad as you think it is, and we're gonna make sure that you're fine." And it was the doctors and the nurses at that hospital that really ignited in me the belief that I wanted to help others. But being 5 years old and being very impressionable, I thought that the only way to do that was by being a doctor or being a nurse. So as I was getting older, I always knew I want to help people. And I thought the only way that I could do that effectively was by being a nurse or being a doctor. So I started going to school. In high school, I was lucky enough to be in a school where we had something called JTED, Joint Technology Engineering District. So what we did with that program is we were actually able to be certified in certain things. There was welding, there was cooking, but the path that I chose was certified nursing assisting, because I wanted to be in healthcare. And I said, if the program's offered, I'm going to take advantage of it because I want to be as best prepared for when I go to college. I will have some experience working with patients directly. So I do my program as a junior in high school, and I do really well, and I find out that I love it. I absolutely love working with patients, and I'm good at it. Then my senior year, they say, we have the advanced version of this program, which is basically the rehash of the same things that you've done before, or because you did so well in your junior year, we can offer just to you a special program in phlebotomy. And phlebotomy is the art of being a vampire. You actually draw people's blood, and they're the people that work in hospitals and in clinics drawing people's blood. And because I was going to be the only one that was going to be doing that program, I, of course, jumped on that opportunity thinking it'd give me a leg up for when I got to college and I started working in healthcare. Do the program, and I start working in a hospital after I graduate from high school. But about 3 months into it, after having worked on the 2007 Hillary Clinton campaign for president, the campaign closes down. I'm still working in healthcare, but I'm realizing that it's not really something that I'm enjoying too much. The long hours, the emotional taxation of being with people who are at their worst every single day. But then after the campaign for Hillary ended, I was able to meet someone who was someone that really turned my life around. I was invited to an event that was being held by Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords in Tucson, Arizona. I wasn't her constituent. I was actually in the neighboring district for Raul Grijalva, but I had been following her career for years. She was someone who had a lot of firsts. She was the first Jewish woman elected to the Arizona State Senate. She was the youngest woman elected to the Arizona State Legislature. So she had all of these interesting firsts, and I had always followed her, but I didn't know too much about her or where she really stood on issues. I go to this event, and within 5 minutes of meeting her and hearing her speak, I was absolutely transfixed. I'd been working with politicians in the local Tucson area who didn't really care too much about their constituents. They were more concerned with winning re-election and getting more power than they were about serving the people that they represented. Gabby was different, and that's what drew me to her originally. So I started talking to the Congresswoman, and I became an intern for her congressional campaign, and I worked on it through 2008. Thankfully, she won. Then I started seeing her at more and more events, and she recognized me, and we developed a friendship. And the more that I started talking to her, the more that I started realizing that the only way to help people is not just by being a doctor or by being a nurse, which even at the age of 18, I still had that misguided notion. I thought I would disappoint my family and disappoint a lot of the other people who I had worked with by choosing something other than medicine. I end up talking to her, and in one of the conversations, she says, you know, politics is not just about winning and losing. It's about making sure that you're doing effective public policy that have positive effects on everyone's lives. So after speaking with Congresswoman Giffords, I actually start getting involved in my local community. On campus, I start joining an education nonprofit called the Arizona Students Association. With that organization, I started advocating for affordable and accessible higher education for all students in Arizona. And I really realized that I had a passion for advocating for others, that I was good at it. I was good at lobbying. I was good at getting people together and making them know what the issues that were confronting them were that they may not have known otherwise. It was that led me to, in 2010, become the campaign manager for a state representative. He had seen the work that I had done organizing students at the college level. He had also seen the work that I'd done lobbying at the state legislature, and he asked me to be his campaign manager. His legislative district was inside of her congressional district. So again, in 2010, I got the opportunity to work with her once more. And I would run into her, and she would always ask me how my mom was doing. She was always warm and always caring about everyone, whether it was an intern or a high-level staffer. And that was the thing that kept me going back to Gabby. In 2010, we had a very difficult election in Arizona in Congressional District 8. It was one of the toughest races in the entire country. It was filled with hate and vitriol, but above all, Gabby stayed above it. While her opponent was acting childish and saying things that no one who is a serious congressional candidate you'd ever expect to say, she stayed above it. She acted like an adult because she had been working on the issue of civility within politics for years. So for her, it wasn't just an act that she ran on to try and get elected. It was something that she genuinely believed in. So again, the 2010 election was very difficult. We ended up having they shot the door of her congressional office after the healthcare vote. And they also had someone who came into a debate and dropped a gun. So it was a lot of hatred and a lot of anger during the 2010 election. Immediately before the election was over, we had a very interesting interaction. It was actually the night of the election, and her race wasn't decided for 2 weeks. It was that close. But everyone around us is depressed. Everyone is crying. We're exhausted. It's the end of the GOTV efforts, so everyone's at their wits' end. And I go up to her private room just to say hello and to drop off a cake my mom had actually made for her. And when I'm talking to Gabby, she comes in and while everyone else around her is crying, and I'm actually starting to tear up because I'm so exhausted, she comes in and she says, you know, it doesn't matter whether I win or lose. The most important thing about today is no matter what happens, we continue to serve those who need us. And again, this is something that really stays in my mind. Someone who's on the verge of losing an important race is more concerned with making sure we are concerned with others and not her own political future. So I immediately signed up to work in her congressional office. I worked on the campaign side for 2 cycles, and I finally got a chance to work in her campaign in her congressional office. I started on January the 3rd. I actually started early. I wasn't supposed to start until January 12th, but I was told, we have this time in between the winter session and the spring session that there's no interns. Would you be willing to come in? I come in 5 days after I do my first event with the Congresswoman. It is at this event that I hear, please come in and just make sure you're taking care of the line. So my job on that day was to make sure that I was funneling people one-on-one to meet with the Congresswoman. I'm standing about 30 to 40 feet away from where the Congresswoman is, and about 10 minutes after the event starts, I actually hear gunshots. What I was doing was signing people in so that we could talk to them. If they had issues with federal agencies, we could communicate with them because we had their contact information. I drop what I'm doing and I run towards where the Congresswoman would be. It was about 40 feet away, and when I get to the front, I notice that there were several people who had been injured. Using the basic triage skills that I'd learned as a certified nursing assistant, I found out who was still alive and who we could still help. I checked about 2 or 3 people for pulses and respirations before I got to the Congresswoman. She was hunched over in a very awkward position, and at first it looked like she was in a defensive position. So I assumed she's actually okay. She's just trying to protect herself. But as I got closer to her, I noticed that she was bleeding. She was actually starting to asphyxiate on her own blood. So my first job was to clear her airway. I propped her up against my chest to make sure that she had a clear airway so that she could breathe properly. And then I started applying pressure with my bare hand, trying to make sure that I was stemming the blood loss as much as possible. So around me is this chaotic scene, but we see a lot of people stepping up. We see people who have never had any medical training take their first step and say, I've had no medical training, what can I do to help? So myself and others who had a little bit of medical training start directing people, hold this, do these compressions. And we saw this community coming together even in this chaotic scene of people stepping up and doing things that they never imagined. So that was January the 8th. And I think the most important lessons that I've learned since January the 8th are, again, things that I've known for a long time. The very first one is kindness, the importance of kindness. I think a lot of us often think that kindness is a random act, that kindness is something that we just do and we don't think about it. But to be kind is something that you need to do that is concerted. It's something that you need to think about, and it's something that you have to do actively. So the power of kindness is the first lesson. The second lesson is all of the training, all of the education that we have really prepares us for what our big moment will be. I had no idea that the training that I had received as a high school student and certified nursing assistant would be what would lead me to help save the Congresswoman who I started working for because I stopped doing healthcare. So there's no such thing as education that's not worthy. All education is valuable, whether it's life lessons or lessons taught in the classroom. We will always be able to come back on the education that we've learned throughout our lives. And the last one is the importance of public service. I think one of the very first things that I said was, I'm not a hero, and I still don't consider myself a hero. I think the real heroes are the people who have dedicated their lives to public service. And public service means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It doesn't just mean being a doctor like I thought when I was young. It doesn't just mean being a politician. It means being a nurse. It means being a firefighter, a cop, a teacher. It means giving of yourself to make sure that others are better off. Making sure that you're helping others in your community in whatever way you see fit. So I think those are the big 3 lessons, and again, I'm really honored to have shared some thoughts with you, and I was really honored to receive this award, so please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.